In the 5th century CE, a Buddhist monk emerged in Sri Lanka who would be a definitive influence on the southern strain of Buddhism, which is called Theravada. The name of this figure is Buddhaghosa. As with many classical Indic figures, it is difficult to find any definitive biographic details concerning his life, although the traditional story is that he came to Sri Lanka from India, possibly from a Brahmin family. Complicating this, writers from the Mon Kingdom, an influential polity within the Theravada tradition based in modern-day Burma, also known as Myanmar, have claimed Buddhaghosa, likely in their attempt to supplant Sri Lanka as the core of Theravada teaching. The traditional story follows that Buddhaghosa converted after being bested in a debate by a Buddhist monk, and that after this encounter he became a monk, or bhikkhu, in admiration of the arguments and teachings of the Abhiddama. He then leapt into studying these ancient Pali works, but travelled to Sri Lanka after being unable to find a commentary which had disappeared on the subcontinent proper. On arrival in Sri Lanka, it is stated in these traditional accounts that Buddhaghosa encountered a huge cache of commentarial texts, composed in the Sinhala language in the great monastery of Anuradhapura Mahaviharaya, which would go on to be the leading light of the Theravada tradition and was tightly associated with kingship on the island. Buddhaghosa, on encountering these texts, is said to have synthesized these many Sinhala commentaries into a single great work, the Visuddhimagga, or Path of Purification. This text, written in Pali, condenses and summarizes the Theravada Abhiddama and the different commentaries written in Sinhala, and is considered to be the most influential work in the southern tradition outside of the Tipitaka or Pali canon itself. The Visuddhimagga deals with the issues of self, mind, and perception, unsurprising considering that it deals with the Abhiddama and Sinhala commentaries on this large corpus of works. One of the issues that Buddhaghosa deals with in this examination of the issue of Anatman, the no-self, and its conception in earlier Buddhism. It was generally accepted between early Buddhists that the self was a conditional causal entity that existed throughout time but was not permanent or unchanging, the exception being the Buddhist substantialists, who had been criticized by Mahayana thinkers such as Nagarjuna. This led to early commentators dividing the sensory apparatus of the human body into the 5 common senses and the 6th sense of the mind. However, Buddhaghosa saw this understanding of the mind as simplistic, which failed to capture the complexities and multi-phased manner in which the mind interacted with the senses. Buddhaghosa was a master of metaphor, and some of the metaphors he drew on to describe the process of perception and consciousness attempted to show how consciousness, attention, and perception were all interwoven and interlinked. One of the most vivid examples used by Buddhaghosa is the system of mind and senses being like that of a spider sitting in its thread. At first, the spider is still and at rest, but then an insect is tangled in the web and the vibrations up the threads disturb the spider. The spider then orientates towards the vibration, investigates, and finally feeds on the hapless prey. In a similar way, Buddhaghosa suggests that the mind was not some simple or singular or holistic sense. Instead, there was a series of phases and functions which were all causally linked. These steps all combine to result in our combined stereostonic experience, as well as the decisions and actions we make on sensing the outside world. With this intricate description, Buddhaghosa is attacking a way of thinking about the self, the mind, and the body which had held great power in the imagination of both the Indic and Mediterranean worlds, the idea of the mind and body as a chariot. In this analogy, the mind, or self, is the charioteer, making decisions and sending the chariot on its course. Depending on the analogy, the chariot and the horses are the body itself, the passions or base urges, which the mind must control and direct. Instead, Buddhaghosa proposes that we are less like a chariot and more like a marionette, a construct of wood twitching to the tugs of strings. Here, Buddhaghosa is not arguing that we are tugged by some grand external being like Brahma, Vishnu, or Shiva, but rather that these cords are much like the vibrating threads of a spider's web, and we dance as but a puppet in a whirlwind of causally linked phenomena. With this analogy, Buddhaghosa is arguing against the need for a self above and beyond the causally conditioned psychological components that make up any single individual. Key to note is that by attacking a monolithic mind, Buddhaghosa attempts to prevent it from assuming the position of the self that Anatman had first brought into question. It is hard to overstate the influence of Buddhaghosa and his works on the Theravada tradition. The Visuddhimagga and the Buddhaghosa's other commentaries on the Pali canon ensured that Pali would remain an important language for the study of Buddhism in the southern tradition. It has been suggested that, in breaking down the mind, Buddhaghosa may have been influenced by the Mahayana tradition, something which was possible because in earlier Sri Lankan Buddhism, Mahayana and Theravada thinkers had existed side by side in many of the monastery schools of the island. Regardless, Buddhaghosa remains an important thinker for South and South Asian Buddhist thought, although within the tradition he has recently come under some criticism, particularly from those who think he distorted or added to the early Buddhist traditions. His musings on the nature of mind and self are both interesting and insightful.